The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest stories in the NBA.
The Lakers thoroughly outplayed by the Clippers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast.
The Lakers are going to have to play significantly better if they were going to beat the Clippers. And what we saw was that they didn't. And a game that they won, they scored 102 points in each of them. Against the Nets, that was good for a 1-point win. Against the Clippers, it was good for a 14-point loss.
There are problems right now on both sides of the ball for the Lakers, particularly against better teams in the league. But in particular, the offense has become a real issue. And in a lot of ways, it reflects what you and I, our instant reaction to the DFS trade, which we both said we liked, particularly as a playoff trade and what they were looking for in the postseason. And obviously, D'Lo's postseason issues, well documented, don't need to be relitigated, yada, yada, yada. But as we both said, during the regular season, and this was always the complicating factor with trading D'Lo in the first place, he's a very useful player for 82 games. The other 16, say whatever you want about him, but the 82 games, they're having a difficult time, I think, replicating, in particular, his ability to move the ball without turning it over. I also think in a lot of ways they are missing his dedication, again, for all of D'Lo's faults, his dedication to trying to run an actual offense while he's on the court. And
or if it's not D'Lo running
action quicker,
right? Just there's a certain semblance of organization, even if it's sort of improvised pick and roll,
right,
read and react kind of stuff. They've lost the sense of sort of control that they had, and flow, and some sense of organization, even if the plays themselves are not called sets from the sideline.
Sure. And I also think, and this is something I've brought up before, and I remember the comments section on the YouTube page took a lot of issue with this, and that's fine. Always feel free to disagree with anything Brian or I say, but I think this has been an issue for the Lakers over the season. I think it was an issue tonight. They take way too long to get into their stuff and get into anything. I mean, even if they're going to improvise and wing it the whole time, they take too long to get to the winging it section. And that, I think, plays at least a part, like a tangible part, in the reason why they have been turning the ball over a lot of late. They had 17 tonight, which turned into 21 points for the Clippers. They often, because they take so long to start doing anything, leave themselves in with very little time to do anything productive, which often leads to passes made from desperation. And then you just start getting into times where, since they're not doing anything, I think, super specific offensively, it leads to guys naturally not always being on the same page together.
Yeah, and I think the speed question here is, it's all related to what you're talking about. Like you get into stuff slower because the organization is just a step or two off, and you're in the ball pressure affects them a little bit more because they have, in the starting lineup, back when D'Lo, Reeves, and LeBron were all there, you had 3 ball handlers, ball movers. Then you drop down to 2. But at all times, you tended to have at least 2 of those guys out on the floor. Most times, you had at least 2 of those guys on the floor. When you didn't, you had Anthony Davis, who served as sort of a fulcrum in a different way to draw attention and things like that. And so now you're operating from a real deficit in that sense. And I get still, it's not like that, you have choices that you have to make, and you make the choice with DFS, like that Dorian Finney-Smith addresses an issue for our team, like you say, particularly come playoff time, that is going to be very important for us. It shores up the defense, gives us a legitimate 3-and-D wing guy that the team hasn't had. Now, I will say this: we don't, we'll get to it maybe over the course of the show or this week. He needs to play more. I think if you're going to have him on the team, I think you need to bump up that role something more significant. But he didn't score on Sunday, and so you look through the lineup, and the first thing that I do now is I look at what the big 2/big 3, if you want to call it that, for the Lakers, including Austin Reeves in there. What did they do in this game? And the output was not nearly enough. You got 16 points from Anthony Davis, 5 of 14 from the floor. You got 25 from LeBron. That's pretty good. 9 of 20 from the floor. But after scoring 38 points on Friday, Austin Reeves was back down to 14. So you're talking 55 points from your 3 best players. And the Lakers,
he had more turnovers, Austin, than he had baskets in this game.
That's not good.
No.
And that is not enough. And it sucks that you have a team that's sort of set up where you're going to need a big chunk of points from 3 guys basically every night. But that's what the Lakers are. 55 points from those 3 guys is almost never going to win a game.
Unless I think you're operating the offense and distributing the ball in ways where, like, say, Rui had 19, 9 of 14 from the field, 7 rebounds. If you're moving the ball to where other guys can get more shots and they actually make them, in theory, more performances across the board, like Rui's tonight, could offset a night where, say, Austin only has 14. But that gets to another thing. And I'm not going to say that this is the point in the game where it was lost, because the Lakers had enough time, from what I'm about to talk about, to try to shore things up. And, just in general, 48 minutes, it's hard to pin it down to one thing. Mm-hmm. But there was a stretch late in the second quarter for about 2-ish minutes, like 2 to 3, where neither LeBron nor Austin was on the court. And the Lakers deficit went from 6 to 12 very quickly. That cannot happen. You cannot have any even single minute over the 48, assuming you're still playing to win, where LeBron or Austin are not on the court. And that is on JJ to recognize you can't do that. It was, I believe, a group of Gabe, Dalton, Max, Rui, and AD. And I recognize that that's a point where you would look to run things through AD, and that's fine, makes sense. But if Gabe is your principal floor general, your offense will not run well enough. It simply will not function.
Especially given that there's no other ball movers there. There's no other there's no secondary. Christie's not good at that. The
secondary ball mover in that situation is AD.
Right. There's so much going on here that, yes, you are correct. If you have, Rui got his points that make up maybe a little bit for
either AD or Reeves,
or either AD or Austin. But then you get 10 from Christie. That's sort of the baseline there. But then only 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 block. It was the other stuff. Christie wasn't there. He had tough defensive assignments, but still. But no points I mentioned from DFS on only 3 shots. Gabe Vincent had 4 points. You did get 4 from Jackson Hayes on a couple dunks, alley-oops, and Connect hit a shot late.
I was going to say
another 3-pointer in the second half.
His 10 points are misleading.
They are. He did have at least 1 3 in that. One of his 2 threes came in that stretch where the Lakers were trying to get themselves back in the game.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, When you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add a little bit of juice to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The Heat hosted Victor Wembanyama on Sunday, but it was their bigs playing together for extended minutes that was the difference in a blowout win for Miami.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast.
David, it finally happened. We finally saw Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo together for real minutes for the first time this season, a significant stretch. Midway through the second quarter, Bam goes to the scorer's table. Kel'el Ware and Nikola Jovic are in there as the front court in that moment. And instead of kind of pointing at Ware, waving him off the court, Nikola Jovic makes his way to the bench. Kel'el Ware is not moving. He's not leaving. He's not walking towards the bench. Bam is walking on the court. And every Heat fan at the same time was like, what's going on? Is this finally happening? And sure enough, 7 minutes into the second quarter, or 7 minutes left in the second quarter, Bam Adebayo and Kel'el Ware stood there as Miami's front court in that moment. Eric Spoelstra goes there. The Heat trailing by 5 points, I believe, at that point. Really couldn't muster much of anything on either end. Couldn't stop Victor Wembanyama. Couldn't really find any flow offensively. And they go to that. They snap off a 14-2 run, take their first lead of the game, and then they don't trail again. They lead by as many as 27 points in this game, and they cruise to a win over San Antonio. Break the 3-game losing streak, get back to a game over 500, much needed jolt in this game against San Antonio. And I'm telling you, it's enough for me, having seen what that looked like. We're going to get into it here, but it's enough for me to declare that this should be the starting front court for the rest of the season. Are you there with me, David?
I'm not quite there. Like, I feel like it should still be performance, not matchup based. Like, I think there are games where it obviously benefits Miami to go with those bigs. And as much as I'm kind of leaning towards it, like I think it should be the norm 80 to 90% of the time. And the reasoning why is because, one, it's different. I think teams are caught off guard. We certainly saw San Antonio being caught off guard by it, but I think the rest of the league is still going to be taking their time until they actually see it in person and kind of deal with it, if they ever do, because at this point, the halfway point in the regular season, Miami's already played a couple teams twice that they won't meet again for a while. So I think it's going to benefit Miami, certainly, but I also still am a little leery of it being advantageous for the Heat in every matchup. And at the same time, I'm hearing a voice in my head say, who cares? It's a lost season pretty much. You're going to have to trade Jimmy. Who knows what's going to happen with that? It's going to be a mess for the next 41 games. Just do something different. Try and see what happens. And so that's why I'm kind of leaning 90% of the time, but I'd still see certain matches where it might be more of an advantage for Miami to go to a different lineup and maybe play a guy like Haywood Highsmith, who we'll talk a little bit later in his reduced role and what that might mean for the Heat moving forward, because I think you're still going to need Haywood, especially with his three-point shooting being what it was and his elite level perimeter defense. Like, those things are still going to be something that Miami is going to rely on. And I think he was benefiting from being in that starting lineup too. So it's going to be, every game you have to kind of look at it and say, you know what, we'll go with our bigs. This is what works. It's going to, it's necessarily going to be a strength for us. But there are other games where it might be, maybe we don't necessarily want to have two, 6'10" and 7-footer out there. It's not necessarily going to be what might lead to a victory. I don't know. That's kind of where I see it. I mean, you don't think that there's going to be certain matchups where it might be more of an advantage for Miami to go with a different lineup?
It could be, right? Like Portland on Tuesday, they don't really go with two bigs. Maybe there's a case to be made that, just go with Bam, and you're not really worried about any of Portland's centers. Go with Bam and Haywood and just kind of keep rolling with that lineup. But they lost 3 straight games. They were kind of going nowhere fast, and this team needed something. Now, the whole idea of this caught the Spurs by surprise. Like, this did remind me a little bit of whatever it was 10 years ago when the Dolphins unveiled the Wildcat in week 3 against the Patriots or whatever, early in the season. And the Patriots wait, what's going on? Ronnie Brown has the ball. Why is he under center?
Do that?
And they just cruised to a win. And they won a bunch of games after that because teams didn't have a chance. But eventually teams figured out the Wildcat, and it wasn't the thing that the Dolphins hoped it would be, I guess, long term. But So there was a little bit of element of surprise here against San Antonio, and they were visibly frustrated by it. You could tell, and a little confused by it. Also, at the same time, a two big lineup is not necessarily the Wildcat. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not doing something like there's a lot of teams in the league that do this, right? That they have the two starting, they have the two centers starting in the game. So you even look like Cleveland being the number one seed. But I like the Cavs, they don't care about matchup. They just say, like, this is who we are. This is our identity. And for a team that is so starved for an identity, I am a little hesitant to be like, we're going to switch it up based on matchup. I would prefer that this team find an identity, land on it, and say, to hell or high water, we're doing this. This is who we are, and we're going to force you to match up with us, because I think Khalil Ware was a leading scorer in this game. He was a plus 27 on the court. This guy has been good, not just tonight, but over the last couple of weeks, week and a half. He's been one of Miami's best players. Just he has been. And so put him out there. I think it helps Bam. I think you saw that right away. They go to that lineup, and you've got Khalil Ware guarding Victor Wembanyama. Immediately, Bam Adebayo slides over to Harrison Barnes. They actually had Bam guard Stephon Castle in the second half, which I thought it was a really interesting coaching adjustment by Spo, because Castle is a non-factor from beyond the arc. So you basically have Bam helping off of him and covering a lot of ground defensively. He had a help side block at one point in the game. You saw him in that second quarter, instead of being guarded by Victor Wembanyama, took Harrison Barnes into the paint, broke down San Antonio's defense, kicked it out to a wide open Khalil Ware from 3-point range. That's the future, baby. Like, that's what it is. And I would like to see them just sort of practice it, get more reps, lean into it, and make it a strength of theirs. Eric Spoelstra did talk about this after the game. Here's what he had to say.
So he can adjust easily. Offensively, look, we've been working on this, behind the scenes, just a little bit each day, just to get them ready, to feel comfortable, to be able to do it and be successful. We don't want to do things and, it fails right away. They'll figure it out. Right now, like, defensively, that just looked like it was elite. So if I have to lean into this thing defensively right now for our team to get to another level, I will. And that could be a path. I mean, that we'll dive into this, but that looks like a path where we can find some higher success, at least on one side of the floor, and we'll figure it out on the other side, whatever.
So they go into this game 10th in defensive rating, 15th in offensive rating. In other words, not special on either end of the court. But as Eric Spoelstra, he used the word elite. We looked elite defensively. The Heat are elite at nothing. They're not elite at anything right now. So if you can get elite at one thing, I do think it's worth exploring it in a very meaningful way and leaning into it, like to use Eric Spoelstra's verbiage there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've already seen it. The cat's out of the bag now. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't go to it more regularly. I don't know exactly in what ways and in what context over the course of an individual game that he'll use it. But yeah, I think this is going to be, at least, if not the norm, it'll be a heavy part of the rotation moving forward, going with Bam and Ware minutes, because I think it worked. Like, we saw it. Like, not only for getting them both going defensively, but also in terms of what it did for Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. And those shooters, they shot 70% in the third quarter when San Antonio was adjusting to what was happening with the Heat lineup. And a lot of that came from the 3-point range. Nikola Jovic had a big third quarter. Hero, Duncan. I think Duncan had struggled, but prior to that, and then once that lineup got going, it seemed like he'd reached another level. He was kind of talking smack a little bit, went in for a dunk. He was reignited. It was a fantastic thing to see. And Miami in general, they was just, I don't know, like, seeing the vibe from that team as they were kind of going with this new duo there, like, it changed completely. Like, after a 3-game lose streak and the drama of Jimmy and his return and everything else like that, it all seemed to shed away in that third quarter, when they just instantly looked like they were re-energized and kind of like they were waiting for it to happen. Like, everybody on the edge of their seats. It's like, this is what we've been waiting for. We wanted to see it. And when it worked as well and dominantly as it did, everybody was so excited for it. It was great to see.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of the most fun evenings this year was me and my wife getting a chance to go out. The excitement, the energy, it's unforgettable. It's unmistakable. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
With the win over the Sixers, the Bucks have completed a 4-0 homestand.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast.
Those Giannis-less minutes to start the second quarter were pretty shaky for the Bucks. That 15-2 run to open the quarter. Luckily, the Bucks were able to close that second quarter on an 11-2 run. Once Giannis got reinserted into the game, the flow looked a bit better. And during that stretch of the game where the Sixers were making their run, I was never truly nervous, more so just watching it like, okay, y'all, like at some point the shots have to start falling. At some point, get it together. Like, come on, I know it's going to happen, but like I'm waiting for it to actually happen. Giannis, of course, was the great equalizer, I thought, in this game. When I saw all with people that the Sixers had out, I was like, this should be a monster Giannis game. And he definitely came through on his end with a big double-double, 34 points, 15 boards, 6 assists. I feel like he was that consistent punch, especially early. And then in the fourth quarter, Dame was somebody who was really able to just kind of take him home again. And some Giannis-less minutes to start the fourth quarter. And that time, the difference between that fourth quarter and that second quarter was Dame was able to be aggressive and the shots were falling.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it came down to shot making. Maxey and some of the other Sixers were making threes as well, but it just felt like every time, they would make a three to make it like an 8-point game or even a 5-point game at one point. One of the Bucks had an answer. I saw Brook Lopez hit a couple threes in the span of about a minute. Dame, I mean, it's like with Dame, right? Like some of these threes are not easy,
No.
and sometimes it seems like he's more comfortable when he's off balance taking these threes. I think of that play where he found Chris on the left block and immediately relocated it to the left corner. Chris got it to him right away. And Dame was like wide open, but he ended up kind of like falling out of bounds on a corner three. And it's kind of like, anybody else, you're watching him, you're saying like, man, like, don't
like set your feet.
Can you just get like squared up? But with Dame, he's just so used to being able to take shots and make shots that way. And so, yeah, I thought he was, kind of subdued early. It wasn't like he had a game where he was missing tons of shots necessarily, but kind of was picking his spots a little bit. And, I think Maxey's a guy. Maxey's interesting because, I felt last year, Maxey kind of the perception of him having this breakout. I think there was a sense of like, oh, Maxey's like past Dame. And I was kind of always frustrated by it because like a lot of the numbers with Maxey, he plays tons he plays like 38 minutes a game. So his numbers are always a little bit inflated by that. This year, his efficiency has been down. His efficiency wasn't great last year either for Maxey. It started really badly this year for him just because he's not a guy I think that is really suited to carrying an offense. The way he did tonight was really impressive, but he's normally has struggled to do that. I think we saw that in the opening game of the season. Like he just couldn't figure out how to kind of go 1-on-5, against the Bucks. And so I was happy Dame got to answer that a little bit. I don't think Maxey's going to make the All-Star team anyway because the Sixers are too bad. And and his numbers, like, when you kind of actually look beneath the raw averages, kind of begin to not look so great because of the efficiency and some of his other things. So I was happy with Dame. I'm keeping a little bit of an eye out on the All-Star team. I'm definitely.
Do you think he makes it as a starter?
It would no, not as a starter. I don't know if he's going to make it at all. To be honest, it's a really competitive East. And the good news is Maxey's not going to make it. Halliburton, I don't think is going to make it just because his start was so bad and his raw numbers, just aren't good. And hopefully, by that time, the Bucks will still be ahead of the Pacers in the standings. Knock on wood. So, we'll have to see. I mean, I really hope he makes it. I think he deserves it. But with Dame, it's hard because he's kind of a known quantity, and I think people just take for granted what he does night in and night out. Yeah. And it's sort of one of those things. I think we expected him to be a bit better this year. After last year and all the talk about like, coming in late in the, right before training camp and, the personal stuff he was going through, et cetera. And it's not like he's been at some like huge, like leveled up kind of place or something like that. But again, you look past the raw stats, the efficiency's better. He's shooting threes better. I think the mid-range game it feels like he's been able to weaponize his mid-range game a little bit more,
I think so
when
too.
he's not just shooting threes. Free throws his attempts are down slightly, but they're still strong. I think he's like 6.5 free throws a game. And again, like defensively, like, is he a good defender? No, but I think he has at times been able to make plays defensively. I think he's been more of a defensive playmaker this year, and obviously the defense as a whole has been better. So he has not prevented them from defending at a high level, which is obviously encouraging. So I hope he makes it. And again, tonight I thought was maybe a quiet first half from him, but he knew when to turn it on, and he was obviously really the story of that fourth quarter when the Bucks kind of said, all right, this has all been cute and all from the Sixers,
Now
but
it's time to close.
yeah, time to close this. And I think Dame showed why he's Dame and kind of the sort of shots that he can make, which again, like at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know, I was looking at Twitter, and Steve Jones, who does a lot of video breakdowns, like had this video breakdown of like Giannis, and it was like a dribble handoff for Dame, and it's like, it's a nice dribble handoff for Dame, and then Dame takes like a fall away like 25-footer.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not really a good shot in the grand scheme of the universe, but it's Dame, so Dame makes these kinds of shots. Exactly. So it feels a little bit like results oriented to say like, oh, look at this great play, but with Dame, he doesn't need an easy shot to be able to hurt you. So I thought, again, Dame doing Dame stuff, and he's obviously overall, especially since the New York game, I think, with the exception of that New York game, he's had a lot of kind of really strong performances for a while now. So hopefully he just kind of keeps it going, and that efficiency has been strong all year, and hopefully he just kind of continues to do that. And to me with Dame, it's just really about like avoiding kind of the bad games, like the really bad kind of random off shooting nights. And again, his 3-point numbers are up this year. I think he's at 39%. And in this last stretch, he was like 21 of his last 39 or something like that from three coming into this game. So he's been shooting it really well. And hey, just keep doing that. Keep shooting 50% from three, Dame. We're here for that.
Easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Easier. And I think for Dame as well, like in this game, we've seen teams blitz Dame. They're looking to get the ball out of his hands.
That's a great call. They did that a fair bit.
And they did that a lot. So I think that's part of why the beginning of the game was more of like I don't want to say a passive Dame, but like he was letting the game. He didn't force the game. Like the Sixers were dictating to get the ball out of his hands. So he said, fine, I can do that. I trust my teammates. And I think what we're starting to see more, and I heard Chris and Dame mention this a little bit in their pressers after this game, of just getting more comfortable in the trust of like, okay, if I get the ball out of my hand early because these teams are trapping and they're blitzing, I'm confident that the ball will find me again if I'm doing what I need to be doing in these off-ball actions. And I think Chris coming back into the lineup helps that in such a big way with his ability to play, make, and just move the ball. And Dame mentioned that him and Chris kind of see the game in the same way, and how helpful that is with them on the court and their chemistry as it's developing as well. So for Dame, I love to see him not force it. And there's a thin line, because I get people wanting him to be aggressive. Aggressive Dame is the best version of Dame, but I also love him having that trust in his teammates of like, hey, if I do this the right way, I feel confident it's going to come back around to me. And again, I think Chris played a big part in that in this game tonight against the Sixers.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a great call out. And I think Dame, and we've talked about that, I talked about with Justin the other day that, the stats tell a pretty clear story. Like when teams trap Dame and take the ball out of his hands, that's when the Bucks offense has been at its worst. Like that's at least so far this season, that's been the kryptonite for this Bucks offense. And one of the reasons why this Bucks offense has been probably the biggest disappointment. If you look at offense, defense, I mean, the defense has been more than good enough. It's the offense which has been a little underwhelming. I think the defense right now on NBA.com is 8th, and the offense is 11th or 12th. So trending in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, I think it just means Dame has to, make quick decisions. And, I think it's going to be interesting to watch the rest of the season, because, if the Bucks don't figure out ways to attack this more regularly, that blitzing, and we saw the Sixers go with the zone tonight. Nick Nurse is like never afraid to junk it up against you.
He'll do whatever.
And especially in a game like this, makes total sense. I think against zone defenses, the Bucks have generally been pretty good, just in terms of, they're They know how to make sure they still get Giannis the ball, like the foul line against his zone. And when Giannis gets the ball, like, in the middle of his zone, like he's going to eat, and if you collapse, and he'll find open shooters. And so I think in general, I think back to years past when like the Heat, we'd see the Heat junk things up with zones, and the Bucks kind of like feel like they're shell shocked. And this year it's been refreshing because it feels like the offense reacts well to zones, and the defense has used the zone to good effect. And we saw it again tonight. They used it for a little stretch. So we'll see. I mean, but yeah, I think getting comfortable, and Dame, his comment about trying to get the ball, he knew like, hey, I need to get the ball out of my hands early in these possessions, and then have the confidence that it'll find its way back to me. And specifically talking about Chris, finding him a couple times and making good decisions. So yeah, I mean, it's just a win-win, obviously, if Dame has that confidence to make the right play, and then to know that he's going to get the ball back. And obviously tonight he was hitting those shots and paying it off. So so we'll see. I don't expect teams to stop blitzing them. But if the Bucks can, be a little more like they were tonight in those situations, and hopefully it becomes less of an issue. Hopefully that offensive rating starts to creep back up into the top 10, top 7, top 6. Like ideally the fully realized version of this team is with an offense that's, a top 5 offense, and a defense that's probably around what it is now. But again, can they kind of, talk and chew gum at the same time? They've got half a season to figure it out.
We're going to see. We're going to see. And I think it should just be mentioned as well. We know the Bucks started the season 2-8, 22-9 since that 2-8 start for the Bucks. Of course, there's been ups and downs throughout that entire process. But I think seeing the record and looking at the ball that they've been playing, and looking at where they are in the standings, and statistically, as well as you mentioned, how they've been hovering with their offensive and defensive rating, that gives me some encouragement of like, I can see what this team can be if they're playing ball a certain way. They can seemingly beat any team any night. The problem with that earlier in the season was that it felt like any night they could also lose to any team. So as long as they get that consistency going, where you're starting to take care of business in the game you need to, as we've seen during this homestand, and then get some of those games that you might not be expected to get, it's going to be a good formula for this team going forward, because you can see the ways that they're growing and changing, from talking about how Dame's been reading these blitzes and getting the actions out, to Chris's comfort with the playmaking, to Giannis being as consistent as he's been. Like, these guys are figuring some things out,